Welcome to part 2 of this Marble Run simulation Blender tutorial. If you haven't seen the first part where we created all of the different assets and 3D models, you can check out part 1 with the link in the description. So in this part we're going to be combining all the models together and creating the Marble Run, and then baking the simulation, rendering it out, and then compiling the frames together. And if you'd like to purchase the finished tutorial project files, you can find those with the links in the description, and in the project files you'll also get my Marble Run asset pack, which comes with all of these different Marble Run assets, and they're pre-set up in Blender's asset browser, so you can just set it up as an asset library into Blender, and then you can drag and drop all the assets into a 3D project to create your own Marble Runs. Now I do want to duplicate the scene and create a separate scene, and why I'm going to do this is because even if we hide these objects are still going to interact with the simulation. So you don't need to follow along with this, but I'm just going to show you real quick. So I'll go to side view and I'll duplicate this piece and I'll just stick it right up here. And I'm now going to move this piece to a new collection, and I'll just call this collection 1 and click on create. So all of these other pieces here, these are the base objects. So let's say I just want to duplicate the base objects and then hide this collection, but then later we can come back to it and we can copy the objects and bring them into our other collection. Well, if I now just play the animation, you can see this object is still interacting with the other base objects, even though the base objects were disabled from the collections. So I'm just going to delete the extra object that I added. So what I want to do is hide the lights and camera, and I also want to delete this extra collection that I just added, so I'll just delete that. So all of these objects here, these are the base objects. So I'm going to rename this scene here to base objects. So I'm now going to click on this button right here, the two little pieces of paper, and we're going to click on full copy. So now we have the base objects and we have base objects 1. So in this one, I'm going to call Marble Run. And then here on the base objects, let's rename this. So this one, we can just call it Marble Run as well. And we'll call this backup 1, and we'll call this lights and camera 1. So we now have the base objects, so we can go back to this and copy these objects if we need them. But then we also just have the Marble Run, so we can just move these objects around and customize them. So then we want to make sure the snapping is turned on when we're moving around these objects. So let's first start by adding this piece here. So we're going to select this piece and let's just drag it right over here, and we're going to rotate it around by 180 degrees. So if I hit 7 for top view, we're just going to move this over here. And of course you can make whatever marble simulation you want, make whatever you want to do, but I'm going to just be making a simple marble simulation where the marbles go over, come down, go around, and then they're going to go up kind of in the middle. The elevator pieces are going to be in the middle. Then they're going to move along these tube pieces and then go back down, and they're going to kind of loop. So I'm going to put this piece maybe just right about here. And let's also go to front view, and I'm just going to drag it up a little bit like that. So let's now select the straight piece. We'll go to top view and I'll just drag it right over here. And then if we go to front view, let's just drag it right up there. So you can see that is going to connect. Then we're going to select this object again. We'll go to top view and I'll duplicate it and stick another one here. And then if I go to side view, let's just drag it down just like that, so it's going down. Then we'll duplicate this again and have another straight piece. And then we'll duplicate this again and have another piece going down, and then duplicate it again and put another straight piece. So this is slowly going down and down. And then we're also going to have 2 more straight pieces. So on side view, duplicate this here and duplicate this again and put it right there. So you can see what we're creating. Now I want to create the rotating piece. So let's select the rotating piece. We'll go to top view and I'm going to move it over here, and let's rotate it by 90 degrees and then hit negative, so it's negative 90, and hit enter, and I'll just bring this right there. We're now going to select one of these pieces again. So this piece here, the piece which is sloping down, and we're going to duplicate this and put this here, and we'll rotate this by 90 degrees. All right, like that. Let's also go to side view, and this piece I want to bring up, and then this piece I want to kind of bring down. So as you can see, it's really quite easy with the snapping just to kind of model this. So I'm not going to show you the entire process. I'm just going to skip a few parts here and there because it's really quite easy using the snapping feature to just rotate and move it around. So let's just continue on here. So I'll go to front view and I'll just duplicate this a few more times. Actually, I'm just going to have 2 of those pieces right there. Then we'll select this piece again, and we're going to duplicate and rotate this piece. And then I'll make another 3 straight pieces. Then I'll duplicate the curved piece, rotate it by 90 degrees. And then we can also select another slope and we'll duplicate it. We'll rotate it by 90 degrees. Put it right there. And I'm going to select all of these base objects and just move them down here so they're kind of out of the way. Then what I want to do is use one of these straight pieces, so the long straight piece, and I'll just put this right here so it's pretty long. All right, so you can see what I've created so far. So this kind of goes down, it curves, goes down again. Then there's like a straight part right here, then it curves around and then curves around again. And then we're going to have an elevator piece that comes up here. So let's select the elevator piece. We can select both of these pieces. We'll move this here, and then we'll rotate it by 90 degrees. and let's bring it up. And we also need to rotate it on the z-axis by 180 degrees, so it's the other way around. And just stick it right down there so this piece can just fall into that elevator. So now what I'm going to do is fill in all of these pieces here so that these slope pieces aren't floating. So I'm going to select these block pieces, and let's move the block pieces here, and we'll just stick them into place. Alright, so you can see what I'm doing, just kind of duplicating these block pieces just like that. So again, this is really quite easy using the snapping feature, so I'm not going to show the entire process. So I'll select these pieces, go to side view and just duplicate it and just move it over here. And then for these little pieces here where the gaps are smaller, you can select the smaller ones and you can duplicate it and stick it there. Go to front view or side view and kind of bring it down. All right. And then we can just select these pieces and on side view, just duplicate it and just fill that in there. Now, another cool thing that I want to do, this is totally optional, but you can do whatever you want, but I think it's pretty cool, is to make like some tunnel pieces. So to do this, I'm going to select this piece here and I'll go to side view and I'll duplicate this and then rotate it by 180 degrees and then bring it up. So this way, if I zoom in here, you can see that the marble is going to go through that tunnel piece. Now let's duplicate it and we'll put another one right there. Duplicate it again and put one there in the center. So there's some cool little tunnel pieces. Also right here, we can make a tunnel piece here if we want. So we can duplicate this piece, we can rotate it by 180 degrees and just bring it down. And if we go to top view and go to wireframe, you can see it's not rotating correctly, so we need to rotate it by 90 degrees. There we go. So now we have another little tunnel piece there. Now, as for the metal track, I'm going to first animate the elevator so I can see where the elevators are. And then we're going to add the track, and the track will go here, go around, and then come down right here back at the starting. So now let's animate the elevator. So what I actually want to do is unparent it because I find that it kind of messes up the animation if it's parented. So we're first going to animate it, then we're going to parent it after it's animated. So let's just select both of these objects and we'll hit Alt-P and we'll clear parent and keep transform. And we want to make sure that the snapping is turned on, so make sure the snapping is turned on. And we want to make sure we're on frame 0, that's going to be the starting. So let's hit the K button and we're just going to insert a location keyframe. So there's just a location right there. So we're now going to go over to frame 25. So go to frame 25 and we'll go to side view and I'll go into wireframe. And then with the snapping turned on, I'll hit G to grab and bring it up on the Z axis by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So just click right there, so it's bringing it up by 8. Now we're going to hit the K button and we're going to insert another location. So now you can see from frame 0 to frame 25, it moves up. So I now want to select frame 0 again, so just select the keyframe there on 0, and we're going to duplicate it and put it at frame 50. So now when I play this, it goes up and then goes down. So now I want to have this continue to loop all the way for the rest of the animation. So if I select all the keyframes by hitting the A key, I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, and I want to drag this over until the duplicated keyframes are right on top of each other. So the last one is going to be on top of the first one. So you can see if I duplicate this and drop it right there, you can see now it's going to go up and down and up and down. So now, because we did that all in one action, I can hit Shift R to repeat the last action. And I'm going to just repeat the last action until it's bigger than 1,000. Let me make sure the end frame is at 1,000. I'm going to have it be 1,000 frames, so make sure the end frame is at 1,000. So now when I play this, you can see it just keeps moving up and down. So now I want to go back to frame 0 and I want to parent this object to the empty so I can move the empty and we can move it around the scene, but it will still move up and down. So we'll go to frame 0 and we're going to select the elevator, then we'll shift select the empty and we'll hit Control P and we'll set parent to object, keep transform. So now I can play the animation, but then I can still move the empty. So now what we're going to do is duplicate this and make a second elevator. So we'll select both of these objects and we're going to go to front view, actually side view, and we'll go to wireframe. And I'm going to duplicate it and move it right over here on the y-axis. So now what I want to do is offset the keyframes so that when the first elevator is at its highest point, the second elevator is going to be at its lowest point. So let's just go to frame 25 and you can see this elevator is at its highest point. So I'm going to select the second elevator. We're going to hit the A key to select all the keyframes, and I'm just going to drag them back by hitting G to grab by 25 frames. So you can see it's 25, 50, 75, and 100, and that's the same for both objects. But now when I play this, you can see they're offset from each other. So when this elevator is at its highest, this elevator is at its lowest. So I can now just select the empty, and I'm going to go to side view, and I'll go into wireframe. Now let's go to frame 25, and I'm going to drag this up here using the snapping, and I'm just going to stick it right there. So now you can see when this is at its highest, this is at its lowest, so the marble will fall into the next elevator, and then this one will go up even higher. So now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to select the first one since the first one is offset back. So select these two, we'll go to side view, and we're going to duplicate them in wireframe and stick it right there, and then we're going to bring this one up right here. So stick it up so that the slopes match. So now if I play this, you can see it's going to fall there, then it's going to go up and then fall into this elevator, and then it's going to go up and fall into this elevator. So I'm just going to do that a couple more times. So we want to select the previous one because it's offset from the first one, and let's go to side view. So we actually want to go to frame 25 so that this one is at its highest point. Let's go to wireframe, and I'm going to duplicate it, and we're going to put it right there. And then if we go back to solid view, you can now see if I play this, that one is at its highest point. And that's what we're going to do. So we're just going to have like 4 of them. You could have more of them if you want to. In the first animation I made, I actually made them not move up quite as much, so I had to add like a few more. But because these are already so high, you can see that we're going to have a lot of space here for the track piece. So I'm just going to do 4 of them, but you can do more of them if you want to. And if you want to make sure this is working, you can go back to the starting of the animation, and you can select one of the marbles, go to top view, and you can move this right over here, and then go to side view and bring it up here like that. So now if I play this, you can see the ball falls down, and then it goes in there, then it goes in there, and then there. So you can see it's working correctly. And you can also just check to make sure the other parts of the animation are working well. So if you just move the sphere over here, bring it up on the z-axis, and then play it, you can just make sure everything is working correctly. So that's looking great. The ball is moving, I think, at a pretty good speed. Now, if for some reason there is a spot where it gets really slow, like let's say it got really slow here on the long piece, what you could do is select the long piece, and you could turn the friction down to like a 0. So if I turn the friction down to 0 and then play this again, then it would be quite a bit faster and it wouldn't slow down so much. So on some of these kind of corner pieces, if it kind of slows down too much and you don't like that, then you could definitely play around with the friction, and then it will go quite a bit faster. Now there also is one more issue right here with the elevators, and that is that the elevators are getting too high. And so this is a really easy fix. You can just go into edit mode and select the bottom pieces and just drag the bottom pieces down, and that way the elevators aren't going to look like they're floating. So you can see if the elevators get larger than this piece, or if they get higher than this piece, they're going to look like they're floating. So what I'm going to do is select this one as well, go into wireframe, and just bring this down just like that. So they're not going to look like they're floating. And we are going to be adding a floor piece, so they look like they're just coming out up and down from the floor. So now let's add the track piece. So I'm going to select the track, we'll go to top view, and I'll just bring the track right over here. Using the snapping, we can stick it right there, and then let's just drag it up. So we'll drag it up on the z-axis like that. And now we can just play the animation, see how that is looking. Let's just select the sphere. So if you go to frame 0, so you can grab the sphere, let's just stick it somewhere like right here, and then we can play the animation and we can see how this is looking. So we just want to make sure that it goes correctly. So just like that. Now this is actually kind of a problem because the elevator continues to go up. So what I want to do is go to, it looks like frame 150, and I want to just select the track piece and move it up on the z-axis. Let's go to side view by hitting 3 on the numpad, and we're just going to drag it right down there so it's just the right size. So just like that. Now there is a bit of a problem here. You can see when this plays, you can see it's kind of bouncing off of this piece here. And this wasn't actually happening when I first was creating the tutorial and prepping the tutorial, but we can fix this just by kind of modeling another piece here. So to fix this, let's go into local view by hitting the / on the numpad, and we're going to go to edit mode, and I'll hit Control R to add a loop cut and Control R to add another loop cut. And then if we go to the vertex select, I'll Shift Alt select both of those loops, and then I want to drag these loops over, but I first need to turn off the snapping. So turn off snapping, hit G to grab, and just drag these over just like that. And now what I want to do is just go to the face select. We're going to select these 2 faces. So select those 2 faces, and we're going to delete the faces. Then if we go to the vertex select, we're going to select all of these vertices here, and then all of these vertices here. And then let's hit F3 for the search, and we're going to type in bridge, and we're going to add the bridge edge loops. So it's going to bridge that together. Now what we're going to do is go to the face select, and we're going to select all of these faces here. So just select these faces here, and we can extrude it down. We can then scale it on the z-axis by 0 and enter, just like that, so there is a nice flat piece. And then also if you want to, you could select these pieces, and maybe just to make it look a bit nicer, you could drag those pieces over so they're not going through. So I'll now hit / to go out of local view. And it looks like I need to go into edit mode again and select these pieces right here. And I just need to drag them down a little bit farther. So now if we go back to the starting and play this, we have a nice little flat plate here, which is keeping it from bouncing out of the way. So that looks quite a bit better. All right, so now what I want to do is select this piece. We'll go to top view and we'll go into edit mode. And I'm going to go into wireframe, and I'm going to go to the vertex select, and I'm just going to box select these vertices and just drag them back a little bit. And also let's just actually turn back on clipping and then drag it back, just something like that, however far you want, maybe right there. So now let's zoom in here to the end, and we're going to turn off the snapping because it's easier to model without the snapping. And we're just going to box select this very edge, and we're going to extrude it and then rotate it and extrude it and rotate it and move it over and just do kind of the same thing we did before. And then we're going to extrude this over like that. And then if we box select everything, let's just drag it out here just like that. Let's maybe drag these back a bit. And then we can do the same thing. So extrude it and rotate it and move it over just like that. And just have it rotate all the way to the very end there. And then we'll maybe box select these pieces and just drag them over a little bit. Box select this piece and extrude that over a little bit. Now you can see it's too high. So if we just go into wireframe and box select the end, we'll hit the O key to turn on the proportional editing, and we'll bring it down on the Z axis, maybe scroll our mouse wheel to change the size of the proportional editing. Now the problem is that we have it turned to connected only, so let's click on the settings and we'll turn off connected only, and now we can hit G and Z and just bring the entire thing down a little bit and kind of scroll your mouse wheel to change the size of the proportional editing, just like that. So it just kind of slowly slopes down, and maybe make it a bit smaller like that, and maybe bring it back just a little bit. So then of course you can play around with this by just playing the animation and see how it looks. You could also have it longer if you want to. Now another thing that I want to do is move everything down earlier in the animation because it's going to slow down a bit. So let's go into wireframe, select everything, and we'll bring everything down on the Z axis just like that so it kind of slopes down. Then let's go to wireframe and box select this right here at the end, and we'll bring it up on the Z axis so it's not sloping down quite as fast. And then I also want to add these beam pieces. So in edit mode, I'm just going to hit the L key to select the beams, and I'll just duplicate it and put some beams over here. Now you can see that the animation stops, or the simulation stops, at 250 frames. That's just a setting that we need to turn on, so we need to just tell it to bake larger frames. The default is 250, but we'll be able to change that later in the settings. Now I also want to make these beam pieces longer, so if we go into edit mode, go into wireframe and select the beams, let's just bring the beams way down on the Z axis so they go way down into the floor. Alright, so now let's add that floor piece. So I'm going to center the 3D cursor by hitting Shift C. Let's go back to the very starting, and then I'll go to the add menu, and we're just going to add a cube. Let's go to top view. I'll go into edit mode, and I'll just scale the cube up, kind of bring it right over here. Let's scale it down, squish it down, move it over. And if we go into wireframe, I just want to make it just big enough to hold all the objects, and then we can scale it down and move it over like that. Let's now go to front view, and I'll scale it down on the Z axis so it's quite a bit more thin like that, and then we can just bring it down, and we want to zoom in really close and bring it up on the Z axis so it's right there so that the blocks rest on it. All right, and then we want to add the same modifiers. So if we select this piece, shift select one of the blocks, we'll use Control L, and we're going to copy the modifiers. And then just make sure we shade the object smooth. Then if we go here to the materials, let's click on the drop down, and we want to add the wood material. So if I go into the rendered view, it now has the same wood as the other objects. Let's also turn on the lights and camera so that we can actually see what the lights are looking like. So now if you want to kind of move around the lighting, let's maybe move these lights here, kind of pointing at the objects. I like a very simple lighting, just having one bright light this way and then one bright light this way. And it should look pretty good from a lot of angles because we are going to be having the camera kind of move around in the animation. Now I do want to add a hole here, just a little hole for where the elevators are. So when you zoom in here, it'll look like there's a little piece or kind of a hole there for the elevators to come up in. So let's go back to solid view. We'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to go to the bottom, and I'll hit Control R for a loop cut and just drag the loop cut right there on the end, and then Control R again to add another loop cut and put this loop cut right over there. So just make it pretty close. It doesn't have to be exact. And then we're going to add another loop cut, and we're going to put this one over here on this side, and then another loop cut right over there. So let's now hit the forward slash to go into local view so we can just see the object. We'll go to the face select, and we're going to select the top and bottom faces, and then we're just going to delete the faces. So let's go to the vertex select, and we're going to shift select these vertices and hit F, shift select these vertices and hit F. And then if we just select these two vertices, we can hit F and F and F just to fill those faces there. So now if we go back to object mode, we have a nice little hole there. So if we hit the / on the numpad to go out of local view, now if I zoom in here, kind of zoom way down there, there's going to be a little tiny gap there. So it'll just make it look slightly more realistic. So now I want to go back to the very starting and I want to select all these marbles here. And let's go to top view and I'm going to drag them over. And then let's also select this marble and drag this over. And we're going to put all these marbles right here at the very starting. Then if we go to side view by hitting 3 on the numpad, let's just drag them up here. And then we'll just deselect that marble, drag these all the way up here on the z-axis like that. All right, bring this over here. And then we can just select all these marbles. We're going to move them over and move them up. Deselect this one, move it over, and we're just going to make all the marbles on top of each other. Now, if for some reason you play the animation and when the marbles get close to each other, if they start to fly apart from each other, that might be that the scale isn't applied. So if you scaled the object down but then didn't apply the scale, then there's going to be a really big gap for the margin, for the distance margin where they bump into each other. So if for some reason they are kind of flying away from each other because they're too close, make sure you apply the scale, but I already applied the scale for these objects. So now what I want to do is delay the animation. So they're going to sit right here for a while and then they're going to fall down individually so they don't all collide with each other like this. So let's go back to the starting, and this one is just going to fall as soon as the animation starts, but I actually want to box select all of these marbles and bring them up so they're a little bit higher. So this is the first one. Let's now do the second one. So what I want to do is select the marble and let's go over here to the physics, and we're going to check mark the animated, and let's just select each one of the marbles and just check mark the animated value. So we're just going to do that for all of them. And if you have like a ton of marbles and you want to do it all at once, you can select all the marbles and then use the object and go to the rigid body and again use the copy from active so it copies the settings. So now if I play this, you can see only this one moves because this one doesn't have the animated value. So now what we can do is we can animate this animated value, and when we turn it off, it's going to start to affect in the simulation. So let's just go to frame 50, and then I'm going to hover my mouse over the animated value and hit I, and now it's yellow because there's a keyframe there. Now if we hit the arrow key to go 1 forward to frame 51, we can turn off the animated value and then hit I again. So now if we play this, this one isn't going to fall until 50 frames. So you can see there we go, and then 50 frames later it starts to fall. So I'm just going to do this for all of them, so it's a really easy process. So I'll go to maybe frame 100, you can just go however far you want. You can hit the I key with the animated value selected, then hit the arrow key to go 1 frame over. You can turn off the animated value, and then hit the I key again. So now if I go back to the starting and play this, you can see this one won't start to fall until we get to frame 100. So now if we go back to the starting and play this, you can see it won't fall until it gets to frame 100. So I'm just going to do the same thing for all of them. So I'll just show you one more time, and then you can do it for all of the different spheres in your animation. So I'll maybe go to frame 150, or actually just like frame 130. I'll go to frame 130. And the animated value is turned on. So I'll hit the I key with my mouse over the value. I'll hit the arrow key to go over 1 frame. I'll turn off the animated value, and then I'll hit the I key. So now if you go back to the starting, you'll have to play it again and let it bake. So you can see that little dark line there on the bottom of the timeline is it baking. So now you can see once it gets to frame 30, then it's going to fall. So I'll just continue to do that for the rest of the spheres. Alright, so I've just finished animating all the spheres. Now if you go back and kind of look at this and see how the animation is looking, if you don't like how the placement is, you can easily change that just by dragging the keyframes around. So let's just say I wanted this one to move somewhere else. Well, what I can do is select that marble and then hit the A key in the timeline to select the keyframes, and we have 2 keyframes. One of them is the animated on and one of them is the animated off. So I could just drag it back or drag it forward, and then when I play this, it's not going to fall until it reaches those keyframes. So they're kind of spread out throughout the entire animation so the marbles don't bump into each other. Now you can see this is starting to get kind of laggy in the viewport, and so a much better way to make sure this entire thing is working correctly is to bake it. Now it's also very important that we bake this before we do the simulation, because if you just try to use the default bake in here, this is like a very quick bake kind of in the viewport. If you start to render all the frames, this bake might go away. I've had it happen many times where if you don't actually do it like a hard bake, then this little bake here in the viewport will go away. And another issue, as well as it being laggy, is that it ends at 250. So we need to do a proper bake. So to do a proper bake, we're going to click here to go to the scene properties. And then we're going to open up the rigid body world, and then we can open up the cache. So here's the cache settings. So there's a simulation start and end. So let's make the end 1000. So it's going to go to 1000 frames because that is my end frame. So before I bake anything, I like to hit Control S to save, just make sure I save the project just in case it crashes for some reason. And then you can click on the bake button and it's going to go through and bake it. You can see it already kind of baked it this far, so it kind of jumped to the end of the simulation. So it is taking a little while, so we're just going to wait till this is finished. So now that the animation is finished baked, I can just scrub through here and just make sure everything looks correct. So if there's something wrong with the animation, if there's something that I don't like, or maybe one of the spheres fly out of the scene, or there's just some other glitch or issue, I can go back and change it, and then I can click on delete bake and then bake it again. Now also, if the animation is too fast or too slow for you, then you can also delete the bake, and then you can change this speed right here on the settings. So this is like a general speed value to change the speed of the entire thing, but I like how this is, so I'm going to leave it how it is. So now we're going to be adding some cameras, and we're going to animate a few different camera angles throughout the animation. So let's go back to the solid view, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm just going to add a camera, and let's hit M to move, and we're going to move this to the lights and camera collection. So let's now navigate to wherever we want the camera to be. I'm going to place the camera to about here, and I'll hit Control Alt Numpad 0. Control Alt Numpad 0 will bring the camera to our view, and then just a few simple ways to move the camera. If you don't know how to move the camera, you can select the camera by clicking in the corner, and then you can hit G to move it around. You can also hit G, and then you can tap the Z key twice. That is going to move the camera by its local Z axis, so it'll bring it up and down, so you can kind of bring that out. And then you can also rotate it if you want to, or you can also just drag the camera around here. Another thing you might want to do is hit the N key to open up the side panel. And if you go to the View tab, you can click on the camera to view. And this way you can move your 3D view around how you normally would, and the camera will follow your view. But I'm just going to turn this off. And then also let's go into the rendered view to see how this is looking. And you could totally use the Eevee rendering engine if you want to, but I'll be using cycles because I want it to look more realistic. I'm also going to hit Control B and then click and drag to add a camera boundary. That only works in the Cycles render engine, but it'll just make the viewport a little bit faster because it will only render what the camera can see. Another cool thing you can do is hit R to rotate, and then you can tap the Z key, so it'll rotate it on the Z axis. So I'm just going to place the camera and just stick it where I want. And then go back to the starting and just kind of play this. Maybe rotate the camera up so I can hit R, and then I can hit X to rotate it on the X axis, but I'm going to hit R and then double tap X, and that's going to rotate it on the local X axis. So it'll rotate it on the X axis by the direction of the camera. So maybe right there. Let's play this, kind of see how that's looking. So then what I want to do is have a few different camera angles, and we're going to animate the camera moving. So I'll just place the camera here, and I'll hit the K button, and I'm going to insert a location. Then I'm just going to play the timeline by hitting the spacebar, and I'll just let the animation play. What I could also do is hold down the Z button and go into the material preview, and that way it'll be a little bit faster because it's just going to be using the material preview. I can also click here on the drop down, and I'll use the scene lights and the scene world, and this is basically what it would look like in Blender Eevee. Because this viewport shading, this is going to kind of use Blender Eevee, so I can just kind of see how that looks. So I'll just play the animation, maybe to frame 200, around 200, and then I'll hit G and double tap Z and just kind of drag this out like that, and then I'll hit K, and I'm going to insert location. So now if I play this, you can see the camera slowly moves. And then to make it so it doesn't speed up and slow down, if you select all the keyframes in the timeline, you can hit the T key, and on default we're using the Bezier, but I want to change it to linear. And this way when I play this, the camera is moving at a consistent speed. So now I'm going to show you how to switch camera angles. Now if you wanted to, you could have one keyframe like right here, and then move over one keyframe and quickly move the camera over. But the problem with that is that I'm going to be using the motion blur. And so if you just have the camera at one pose and then quickly move it to another pose or another view, there's going to be a bunch of blurring because the camera is moving so fast. So instead, I'm going to use the camera binding. So what I can do is just make sure that I'm on frame 200. This is where I want the end of this camera to be. And then with this camera selected, I'm going to move my mouse here in the timeline, and I'll hit Control B. That is going to add a camera binder. So now what I can do is just use the arrow key to go one frame over, and I'll hit Shift D to duplicate and duplicate another camera and just drag it over here. Now I want to create a new animation. So if I just hit B for the box select and just box select these two keyframes, I can delete the keyframes. Now I want this to be the active camera. So you can see it has this black triangle, which is telling us that it's the active camera. So I'm going to hit Control 0. So Control 0 will set it to the active camera. Now I need to bind the camera right here at frame 201 with the camera selected, with the active camera, and here on the timeline. You can put your mouse on the timeline and then hit Control B. So now if you go back and forth, you can see it's the first camera, and then it jumps to the second camera. So now I'm just going to place the camera where I want. So I'll hit R to rotate. Let's rotate it. G to grab, kind of move it over here, drag it back. And I'm going to drag it over here. Let's rotate it along the Z axis and maybe rotate it along the local X, rotate that up. Drag it over here. I do also have a tutorial specifically on how to use the camera, so if you're unfamiliar with kind of moving the camera around, you might be interested in checking out that video. I believe it's called How to Use the Camera in Blender on my YouTube channel. So I'm going to maybe zoom in like this, maybe rotate it a little bit and bring it down. So now you can see it's going to change views, and now it's going to be that view. So let's go to frame 201 or wherever you want the camera to start, and I'll hit K and I'm going to insert location. Now I can just play the animation and I'll just have it go maybe to around 400 or so, or maybe 350. Let's just go to 350 and I'll hit G, double tap Z and kind of move it out. We could maybe rotate it a little bit like this, and then hit K and insert location. Now, because I just inserted a location keyframe, it's not actually going to change the rotation. So back right here, let's hit K again, and we're going to click on location, rotation, and scale. Now, if we go all the way back here to the starting, I can go to frame 201 and maybe rotate this, maybe bring it down, bring it in a little bit, and then hit K again, and we'll add location, rotation, scale. And because we did that on frame 201, it overrided the keyframe. So now if I play this, you can see that's going to work correctly, and it's also going to rotate slightly as it moves. And then again, to make sure that it's linear, so it's moving at a consistent speed, just hit the A key to select all the keyframes and hit T, and we're going to choose linear. So now that is the second animation. So I'm not going to show you the entire process again because it's really just the same exact process through the entire animation. However, I am going to show you one more time just so that you can get familiar with everything. So at frame 351, I want it to switch camera angles. So here on the first one, we had to add 2 camera markers here because we had the first one and the second one. But for the next one, we can just switch it to the next one, so we only need to add 1 camera marker. So if I just duplicate this, hit Shift D, I can put it there. Then I want to hit B for the box select and box select these 2 keyframes and just delete the keyframes on the new camera. Then I'm going to hit Control 0 so that this becomes the active camera. And then with the camera selected and my mouse hovered in the timeline, you can again hit Control B. So now if I go back here, you can see it's the second camera. So here's the first camera, here's the second camera, and then here's the third camera. So let's just now animate this one. So I'll go to 351. That is where this animation starts, or that's where this camera starts. And I will rotate it over. Let's bring it over here, rotate it, bring it over here, and then I'll rotate it down along the x-axis, so R, and then double tap X, and we'll rotate that down, maybe rotate this over a little bit, and then we can bring it back by hitting G, and then double tapping Z, and I'm just going to bring it maybe right there. I think that was kind of cool. So I'll select the camera again, we're going to hit K, and we'll add location, rotation, scale, then I'll just play the animation. Let's just go maybe all the way to like 500 or a little bit farther. Something like that. I'll go to maybe like 550 and I'll hit G to grab and bring it up here. I can also rotate it a bit, bring it back a little bit. You can just place the camera wherever looks good and then hit K and add location, rotation, scale. So now if I play this, you can see it's kind of following those objects. And then again, select everything in the timeline and I'll hit T and I'll set the keyframe interpolation to linear, so now it's playing at a consistent speed. So now I'm going to skip to the end when I've added all the camera angles. Alright, so I've animated all the different cameras, so just in case you want to do the exact same camera animation that I've done, I'll just play through this. So you can see here's the starting, so the first camera is just kind of zooming out here, and the balls fall down. Then it switches to a lower camera angle, and you can see all the balls kind of moving around here, or the marbles falling down. Then it switches to showing the elevators, and it's kind of moving up with the elevators, so you can kind of follow like the red ball. Then it switches to kind of a top view, and it's kind of moving sideways to show the balls moving up the elevator. Then I liked this shot right here where it kind of shows the marbles kind of moving along the track and it's zooming in. And then the last shot here, it kind of rotates over to the side. So if you want to do the exact same animation, you can do that and just finish up the animation, but really just play around with it, try different camera angles. I like to move around here and kind of see what looks good, kind of move to different angles in rendered view to kind of see what I like until I find some views that I think look interesting. Now what I also want to do is add a depth of field to each one of these cameras, and that way it'll just make it look a bit more realistic and it'll have something in focus. So if we just go back to the starting, we're going to select the first camera, so just click in the corner here to select it, and we'll go to the object data properties. And what I'm going to do is turn on a depth of field, and then we just need to choose some focus object, which is roughly kind of in the center. So I'm going to click on the focus object here, and I'm just going to click on this little slope piece. And then for the f-stop value, I like to turn it all the way down to 0 or all the way down as low as you can. And then I like to click on the arrows and just turn it up kind of as much as you want. And because these marbles are really small, you could go with like a really high depth of field to add kind of a cool effect. I do kind of like how that looks, but I think I'm going to go with maybe like a 1.4. So it's kind of nicely blurred here, but then focused right over there. I do like kind of a more high depth of field, especially for smaller objects, just so it kind of looks a bit more small and kind of zoomed in. So we'll go to the next camera. We're going to select the next camera here. We'll click on depth of field, and on the focus distance, we'll click on the eyedropper, and I'm going to choose this piece. And then I can just turn the f-stop down, maybe turn this one up to maybe like a 1.4, or maybe even turn this up to like a 1.8, so it's a little bit more in focus. Now this entire spot here is blurred, so maybe on the focus object, I'll choose like one of these cubes here, which is a little bit farther back. So let's go to the third one. We can click in the corner to select the camera. We'll turn on depth of field. We'll use the focus distance, and I'm going to choose this piece here. And I'm just going to continue to do this for the other cameras. Now the last thing that I'm going to do before I render out this animation is I'm going to just duplicate some of these blocks and stick them here kind of in these corners, just because I think it makes it look more interesting and makes it look like someone was kind of building these blocks and kind of built like some blocks here around these slopes. So I'm going to go to top view and I'll just duplicate this. Let's also turn on the snapping and then duplicate this, stick this here. And I'll just add like a few different blocks here. Maybe duplicate this, put that there, duplicate a couple more blocks. So if I go into the rendered view, you can see now we have like a little kind of layer of blocks here, a couple different layers. So I'll duplicate these blocks, put some here, duplicate maybe these two right over there. We can maybe select all of them and duplicate them and move them over there. And then if we just select a few of these like that, we'll duplicate them and move them up here. So again, we have another kind of layer of blocks. You could also select kind of these smaller blocks, which are like half the size. And you could maybe put a few of these. So like maybe put one there, duplicate it and put another one like right over there, put one down here on the bottom. So it just adds a lot more visual interest. It makes it look like someone was just building some blocks and kind of just left a few rough blocks here and there. So let's now render out the scene. So I'm going to be using the Cycles rendering engine, but if you want to, you could totally use the Eevee rendering engine if you want to. It just doesn't look quite as realistic, so I'm going to be using Cycles instead. So let's now open up the sampling, and here on the render samples, I'm going to turn my samples to like 150, and I can also turn on the denoise so that it denoises the viewport when it renders. And then also if I go up here to the output properties, normally I record my videos in 2560 by 1440, that's the resolution of my monitor, and so I record my videos in that high resolution. However, just for this tutorial, so it renders a bit faster, I'm going to turn these to the default of 1920 by 1080, and then also let's go here to the output properties, and we can click on this file icon to set an output. And what I'm going to do is go here into the folder with my project files, and I'm going to click on the plus to add a new folder, and I can just call this frames, and I'll go into the folder and then click on the accept button. So it'll render out all the 1000 frames into that folder. And then also here on the file format, I'm going to choose JPEG instead, and I'll turn the quality to 100. So it'll still be decent quality. I'm turning the quality to 100, but the file size of all the images won't be quite as big. Now, because this is a pretty large animation, if you want to make the animation render a bit faster, what you can do is open up the light paths here, and you can turn down as many of the light paths as you can. So I'm just going to turn off the reflective and refractive caustics. I'll turn off the filter glossy, turn off the indirect light. We don't have any transparency, so I can turn that off. And most of these values, like the transmission, we can turn that down. I believe we do need a few of these values, because if I turn these all the way down to 0, you can see the reflections look a bit weird and things look a bit darker. So I'm going to turn the total, diffuse, and glossy to 2, but everything else I'll turn all the way to 0, so Blender won't have to calculate as many of the light paths in cycles render, so it'll render faster. But if you're using the Eevee rendering engine, then this won't even be here. So always make sure you hit Ctrl S to save the project before you render, and then you can click on Render and render the final animation. Alright, so the animation is finished rendering, so I've just opened up a brand new Blender file, and I'm going to open up the video editor by clicking on the plus here, and I'm going to go to video editing and just open up a new video editing workspace. And then here in the sequencer, I'll hit Shift A for the add menu, and let's add image and sequence. Then just locate to the folder where you have the frames. I'll go into the folder, and then just double tap the A key to make sure all the frames are selected, and click on Add Image Strip. And then what you can also do is you can click here on strip, and you can go to the set render size just to make sure it's using the correct render size. And also we use the default frame rate of 24 frames per second. Now right here in the very bottom corner of my screen, I'm going to type in 1000 right down there, so it's using 1000 frames, and then I can hit the space bar to play this. We can just watch the final animation. So of course, if you want to, you could add music and sound effects, whatever you want to do, but I'm just going to show you how to render this to a video. So let's scroll right down here, and I'm just going to set an output. I'm just going to render it to my desktop. You can set it to whatever output you want, and then on the file format, I like to use FFmpeg video. And then here, if you open up the encoding, I like to use MPEG-4, the video codec of H.264, and medium quality and good. And then if you have any audio, I like to use AAC. So you can save this video editing project, and then you can click on render and render the final animation. So that's going to wrap up this tutorial on how to create this marble run in Blender. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. And if you'd like to help support the channel, you can also purchase the finished tutorial project files linked in the video description. But I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and thank you for watching.